So welcome everyone to today's midnight training session on the print estimation system. We'll be going over advanced level handling of print estimating, focusing on key areas like wide format and some multi-part handling, as well as implementation to the dynamic job board and invoicing systems. To start things off, I'm going to take a look at our global settings, which allows us to see some of the core adjustments that we can make regarding the print estimation system as a whole. Under our estimates and orders pop-out, we'll have the ability to adjust our print markup percent. This is our default percent for any markup on any new template that's created or any new instance of a job that is created. This relates to both wide format and your general print estimating system. The more details view, default spoilage, price matching, and bleed handlers all tie into the general print estimation system and allow you to modify certain fields in terms of what you can enter. Price matching will be a key area of focus today, as this is basically the closest way that you have as a user to overriding the price of any particular print service or group of services within a print task to come up with a straight value for invoicing that overrides the consolidated amount of all other elements. You also have instances of customer-specific pricing and contract pricing, which can be assigned to your jobs and estimates. Contract pricing can be established in such a way that templates are tied to that contract, and prices for both rates or quantities can be associated. If we look in our standard services list, we'll be able to see some details on the services themselves. If we take a look at our actions list, we'll see that we have some choices such as WF Calc, SWF Calc, and Print Calc. Any of those actions will bring up the calculator of choice. In the case of the Print Calc, that will bring up a general print calculator, which is what I'd gone over in our previous sessions. In the case of the WF or SWF, these correspond to the wide format calc and the simple wide format calculators. By selecting the service launch action of launch wide format calculator, this is how you can trigger it to be brought up upon service creation. The prices that you see here, base price, min price, etc., these do not tie into anything related to the costing of anything brought up in the wide format calculator or the general wide format calculator, as well as the standard print calculator. If you do have an additional service that you'd like to tie to it, you can use this screen to handle pricing for those particular services, though. If we take a look at perhaps our cutting service, we can see that the wide format additional service container can be checked. In here, you can pick and choose your method of price determinant, such as based on the amount of square foot for whatever is being printed on. The raw quantity, for instance, how many instances of this particular service are having anything applied to them. NA, which defaults the quantity to a 1, or per linear inch, perimeter length, or width based. In these cases, the cost per unit is what is referenced inside of the calculator when you load the service. And this cost overrides the base price that's established on the left-hand side. If we take a look at a grommeting service, we can probably see that choice, for example. Nope, there may not be one, in which case we can add a new one. One final part in this section, the volume pricing instances that you have below do not count towards the costing of anything brought up within the print calculator. These only correspond to prices as they're added through the standard estimator order form. So we'll save out of here and touch on another area. For the general print services on the standard print calculator, you have access to a paper cutter system. In here, you can create a paper cutter which ties itself to one of your services that are marked as an additional service. You can assign some information as far as the depth of the cut and any costing associated with it. And not yet, but soon, we'll have a lift tracking system built into the standard print calculator, which allows you to track the full time that it takes to do any of your cutting work and tie that into the general cost of the expenses to run your machine as a whole. The depth cuts, widths, and throats are not required, neither is the time. But if you do have any costing associated, you will want to set up the cost and hourly rate. And when this is placed onto the estimator order form, it will respond to this service for taxable status, proper GLID association for accounting, and also for scheduling purposes on the dynamic job board. Additionally, you have the paper finish, paper grade options. These allow you to more effectively sort and organize your inventory, because within the print calculator, you have different ways to search for your stock, and the ways of the pop out in it allow you to sort based on these couple of options. If you wish to add new instances here, along with most of our other screens that are simple table structures, you can add a new instance of text in the gray container at the bottom, making sure that the active box is checked for active. And by clicking the Save Disk, you commit the record. If you wish to remove it, you can hit the Delete button. However, we typically suggest editing the record and deactivating or disabling the record. The reason for this is because you may have instances of your data that refer to pieces that are important as far as information goes, and deleting that may cause some issues with the integrity of past orders that were entered into the system. Typically, deactivating that information does not cause any historical issues. Finally, under the admin menu, we have the wide format product type and wide format quality setup. Under here, you can set up your wide format templates and your wide format quality instances, which are associated for costing. Much like everything else within the admin list, you can give them sort orders, default names, and in here you can give resolutions, which are simply information. the production speed of how many square feet per hour can be printed, and the general ink cost per square foot. Under the product type list is where your templates are created by going to the quick links list and hitting add wide format product type. If you are to edit ones that exist or jump into them by clicking, you can change the details on any piece of it by determining to start which calculator is utilized to bring up that service, any default additional services like cutting, grommets, tape, materials, etc. And the general pricing and material information that's associated with the wide format instances. The materials list that we have here is populated from your inventory module. Any items that are classified as wide format in the item type will fall under this category and will subsequently be added to the order's inventory tab when applied to a job. So that way you can properly deduct consumed inventory. The cost per square foot simply covers the expenses related to the length and width of the job itself. And the option to round your total is simply a default where you can either bill out to 5 decimals beyond the dollar or 2. If you're using the straight wide format calculator, you do have different options, such as a markup override, the amount of sides that are being printed on, waste expenses, price override options, and the costing method where you can bill by area of printed space or by the time required. For the purposes of scheduling, you can also select your machines, which populate on the dynamic job board accordingly. The machines list for the wide format services comes from the print calculator. And they're derived as a print machine of the press type of wide format, in which you can set up the available types of run quality, a default, and adjusting any details as necessary. You can also set up the default cost method, such as time or area based, a flat hourly rate, set up fees, min charges, etc. So I'll jump into an order and I'll set up an example of a wide format job. We'll set up our counts and quantities names and dates. And in the case of my wide format calculator, I'll launch it through our wide format service department. In here, I can pick from any of the templates that I've built and associated with the wide format calc. Detailed information such as the material type, the printer associated, the amount of size printed on. Everything carries through as you would expect. You'll have to select the material that you're printing on. After clicking Save, you'll be given a project name and a breakdown of all of your costing elements. If you're happy with all of your expenses, you can play with the markup to come up with a price number, which after clicking Save updates the per piece price or the total price. And after clicking Save and Close, our service adds itself to our respective department, as well as the other services adding themselves to their respective department. You'll see that they're tied because of the, in this case, yard sign, which is the service name. And if we give it a different description, that name will override what we see here in the description. To get back into the calculator, you can click the Launch button. Adjust the information of your job as necessary, changing either the name, pricing, or both. And your new numbers will be placed on the job as ready. Now the consumed inventory that we selected will add itself to our inventory tab. Assuming that you're working with a material such as rolled canvas, you may need to adjust the quantity needed to match your unit of measure that you're deducting your inventory by, either feet, meters, yards, inches, whatever your method is. And when you're prepared to deduct your inventory, you can either click the Deduct checkbox or plug in your dates to bring up your automatic deduction system. Within our reports, we have the work orders, such as the work order print, work order advanced. These bring up the documentation that you'll need to produce proper info paperwork for your job jackets to make sure that your production team does what's necessary. And all of our reports show the print information just a little bit differently. Wide format, for instance, shows just a simple breakdown of what's necessary, the additional services tied, and then a final page which has the full consolidation of all required services. The standard work order will show information a little differently. You'll have a breakdown of your services required, and also a container that shows your pricing breakdown a bit simpler, as well as a scanned barcode with detailed information on your required inventory. In addition to that, you also have the invoices, which can show each element of pricing differently. For instance, the invoice price will show each piece of work related as its own separate cost. The invoice print will list just the job itself and the total cost. Or you could use the group billing module found in the quick links to consolidate everything into a single item. Now if we load our invoice price group billing, for instance, we'll see a full breakdown of everything consolidated into a single line with a per piece cost as necessary. This is great if you have multiple items, for instance, 2 sets of yard signs. because you can consolidate each required element of pricing into a single line and have each line broken down with its own description. Finally, with our given due date, we can jump into the job board and actually see these instances of services on our board. We can log our work against it based on the time that we see calculated from the estimated time derived from all of the services associated, and complete them accordingly so they fall off the board, and subsequently any production reports associated. Additionally, if you click in the job on the production report, on the job board, you can bring up any of your documentation, such as your work orders, hacking slips for inventory purposes, or other reports that you set up to be visible through here. So that way your production team can recopy or reprint documentation as needed without having to enter the job and see information that they may not be given permission to see. One final area to touch on, the WF item type covers the materials that we use on our wide format calculator and our simple wide format calculator. This is predefined in your inventory item types list and simply requires that you set the item type to wide format to have it available. The paper details allows you to correspond pricing based on the cost per square foot and weight per square foot, as well as select the sheet length and sheet width, or if it's a roll, the roll length and roll width. So that way you can determine how much of your inventory you're using and if it can actually fit within the machine that you're attempting to do your work on. The other areas, such as basis weight, paper markup, all refer to data utilized in the standard print calculator and are not part of the wide format. Now, to create one more new instance of work, we'll take a look at our multi-part job system for our standard print calculator. This is a tool that's effective for production of books, brochures, or other sorts of documentation that consolidate themselves using a variety of printed medium. To get into the multi-part handler, all that's required is to launch the standard print calculator. Any services that have themselves associated with the launch action of print calc will bring it up. In this case, I'll simply launch our print item service. I'll fill in our core information out of a template that's already been set up. In this case, my booklet's digital print cover. I'll click Save to commit the record. Oops. My pricing and production time will update accordingly. And if I need to set up a second instance of print work, I can click the Make Multipart Job button to be brought into a new window, which allows me to create more than one piece, up to 7. By clicking Update tabs after giving each required piece a name, I can have each of my pages brought out with proper naming and their cost information updated over here. As I take a look at each part, I'll also see the additional services that are associated with that particular template. In this case, my cover booklets work has no additional services. My text, however, can have any number of additional services tied specifically to it. We'll set up 8 inside pages as my template, for example. We'll see here I have cutting and folding associated as my additional services. And after saving this, I can jump into my main list, get a glimpse of my total pricing for the cover and the interior work to be given my total price. This total price can be overwritten by utilizing the price match here. This is what will be the invoiced value. Expense reports, such as the job detail analysis report, will keep tabs of this information for proper expense tracking and revenue tracking. But this is what the client will see when they're being invoiced. And to adjust this number without adjusting the cover or text work in this example, you can play with the markup here to give yourself a new recalculated total after clicking save. Finally, any additional services that you want to tie to the entirety of the job, such as binding or saddle stitching, can be associated out here. And you can give your multi-part job name to anything that makes sense to you internally, so your documentation prints out as you would expect. So in this case, after clicking submit, I'm given my print service of the books. I have my cover and text, which are individual print elements with their own respective costs. And I have the finishing, which in this case will load with my folding, cutting, and binding, along with information to let me know where each cost comes from. In this case, cutting and folding clearly come from my text bracket, and the binding comes from my primary main piece that I've identified as books. In this case, if we open up one of our work order reports, we'll see the information broken out. So that way each particular print element is broken out into their own subpages, and you have the primary job, in this case books, listing each subcategory of work that's done within it. This example, page 2 is the cover. Page 3 is the text work. And after the cover and text, you'll have respective inventory breakout. Alternatively, you have the work order print, work order depth, versions, and advanced, which show the information differently. But the multi-part job work remains pretty much the same across each version of the report. In the case of work order print, you don't have a breakout of the inventory, for instance. Invoicing, like the wide format handler, is relatively similar. The invoice price, for instance, will break out each individual piece. In this case, the invoice print will show everything consolidated just like before, with a subtotal only. And you can again use the group billing to consolidate your services as necessary to show your client whatever they need to see in whichever fashion they need to see. Finally, within the order under the inventory tab, you have breakups of the required inventory for each particular task, along with a calculated reserved column based on all instances of the inventory record itself across each version of this particular job, which can be deducted as needed by using the deduct pop-out or by plugging in one of the dates, which triggers your automatic deduction system. After saving and closing this job, we can jump into our production board on the dynamic job board view. And again, we'll see exactly what we would expect to see with the breakout in the respective departments of the work associated with that particular job. Whoops. As indicated here, be aware that if you do not have a date associated with your job, either a due date or a drop date, your services won't appear. So we'll update the job records, and now our information will show as expected. Much like we saw before, the estimated time calculates on each example of the particular insert work. The main item, or the multi-part header, has its own line, which can be completed additionally against the other work to indicate that not only has each element of the product been completed on its own, but that the consolidated work of all pieces has been completed. This particular instance won't have a calculated time because it is a consolidation of the two services, in this case, cover and text. But because it has an associated service of binding, it is tied to something that looks at all pieces of the particular job. Lastly, if we wish to log some time against this, we can either click the actual time by clicking in this. You can select who it is that's doing what work for what particular part of the job. And that information can be checked within the job costing module. So you can double check and make sure that your employees are logging their work as they need to. That's pretty much everything for our wide format system and our multi-part print calculation system. I will close down the recording and I'll open up for Q&A.